The Naked Truth Report is sponsored by Kathleen Wells on AM 870, The Answer.
Warning, the following program has been rated T for truth.
You can't handle the truth!
Oh, we think you can. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report with your host, truth warrior and mythbuster, Kathleen Wells. The place where we distinguish fact from fiction, where data is used to drive points home, and where Kathleen takes the position that Democrats and black politicians have destroyed black America. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. Now, your host, Kathleen Wells.
Welcome, my truth warriors and mythbusters to the Naked Truth Report. I'm your host, Kathleen Wells. We have a great show today. In fact, I have a guest. We're gonna focus on DACA. But before we bring on my guest, I want to talk about a few things. I just want to mention a few things. One of the things I'd like to say is that I just saw an article in the Los Angeles Times titled, liberals say that immigration policies are racist, yet they benefit black men most. So, my question is this: how do Democrats have any legitimacy, any credibility to talk about anything, given that they've had 5 decades of no progress for black America? That's one thing I want to say, right? The other thing I want to mention is, I know I've mentioned this to you guys before. Please go to my YouTube channel, The Naked Truth Report, because I'm trying to get ICE on the show as a guest. I've contacted ICE. I'm in communication with them back and forth. I'd like to get Director Holman. Yeah, that's Holman, Homan. I've reached out to him, and then I've also reached out to, the ICE community engagement guy. I think his name is Marco Martinez. So I'm still going to try to make that happen because I want to have ICE on the show. I want to have a representative from ICE come on the Naked Truth Report. I think it would be a good thing, right? Okay, the other thing I want to speak about is veterans. I want to talk about how illegal immigration adversely impacts veterans. When I'm driving to I'm on the freeway. What freeway is that? I can't remember the number. But I see homeless people living alongside the freeway. I've seen, every week I think the Los Angeles Times has an article on homelessness in Los Angeles. The whole nation is looking at California. The entire nation is looking at California and what's happening, how we're going like downhill, how we're like 50th in terms of quality of life. Our school system is at the bottom. In fact, Kevin DeLeon was on C-SPAN last week, and he was just boasting about how wonderful California is. We're like, I forget the number, like something, he says something to the effect like, we've got the 5th greatest economy or something like that. These politicians think California is doing fantastic. And yet there's so much homelessness and the poverty rate is amazing. And then at the same time, we've got what? Kevin DeLeon appointing an illegal alien to a state commission, right? So we've got American citizens that are homeless, and yet we have illegal aliens being appointed to a state position. I think her name is Mateo. She was born in Oaxaca, Mexico. She came to the U.S. at 14 illegally. She's still illegal. And she will serve on the California Student Opportunity and Access Program Project Grant Advisory Committee. The committee advises the California Student and Commission on efforts to increase college access for California students from low-income or undeserved communities. Wow, right? 50 years ago, that's something that, wasn't that something like affirmative action for black folks? And now, fast forward to today, we've had like no progress. So these programs are meaningless. They're null and void. Nothing happens. We can go 50 years from now and realize nothing good has come from this committee on advising California students on college access. Kevin DeLeon, and we talked about Kevin DeLeon last week, remember? I think I mentioned him last week or maybe the week before. I think it was the week before, where, Dianne Feinstein didn't get like the endorsement from the California Democratic Party because she was sort of challenged by Kevin DeLeon, who's the Senate California Senate President pro tem. So he's moving on up, right? That guy's moving on up. One of the things that DeLeon says, quote, Mateo dedicated herself to fight for those seeking their rightful place in this country. What does that mean, their rightful place in this country? What does that mean? Rightful place. So the question is, if you come to the United States illegally, do you have a rightful place in America? That's the question. Anyway, I'm going to go straight to my guest. We're going to talk about DACA. It hasn't been in the news. Let's see. We had the Parkland shooting at the high school last week. So gun control has sort of like absorbed all the news for the last week. But before that, for weeks, if not a month, or a few months, we were talking about DACA. That was absorbing, taking up all the oxygen in the news was DACA, right? So we want to get up to date, up to speed on DACA. We want to find out what's going on with it because you know it's not really in the news so much right now because they're talking about the Parkland shooting, gun control, that kind of thing. So that shooting in Florida. In Parkland sort of pushed DACA off the news, but we want to know what's going on, and we're going to be joined by my guest, Stephen Camarota, who is the Director of Research for the Center on Immigration Studies. I mean, he knows this stuff backwards and forwards. In fact, I met Stephen, I went to a symposium or a workshop on immigration last September in DC, and I met Stephen. So Stephen, welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Thanks for having me.
So bring us up to speed. DACA's been in the news for it got pushed off of the news because of the Parkland shooting. So bring us up to date. What is going on with DACA? Is it still active or not?
Well, it's a little bit difficult to say. As your listeners may recall, the Senate failed to approve any kind of DACA measure. So it looked like at that point things were dead, though people talked about bringing back up. Now, more recently, in the last few days, Trump has said that he might be willing to exchange funding for the wall in return for some kind of temporary DACA extension. As your listeners may recall, on the one hand, Trump terminated DACA, which was always a discretionary policy of the executive, but then several courts, 2 federal courts so far, have said that he can't terminate it for reasons that make no sense to anyone at all. So it's still going on. At least renewals are still going on. And so, but anyway, so that's where we stand. There's this sort of proposal out there that doesn't look very serious, and it looks like the White House has kind of walked it back to maybe have some kind of temporary extension for some kind of border and wall funding. At the same time, it's working its way through the courts. It is amazing that the advocates of DACA were always clear that it was a discretionary policy, that it could end at any time. It was only an administrative policy. It was basically something that was certainly not in law, but it was something that was something that could end. And yet, when President Trump, using his presidential authority to end it, has 2 extremely liberal federal courts have said that he can't do it on the most crazy grounds. I'll just give you an example. There's a thing called the Administrative Procedure Act, which says that when you have policies, I'll try to keep it really brief and simple.
Yeah.
You have to like put it out there for comment. There are a series of things that you have to do. Now, DACA did not go through the Administrative Procedures Act, which was a severe criticism of it at the time. However, so this executive action was not implemented in that way. However, when Trump moved to end it, 2 federal courts, or at least one actually, said that he can't end it unless he goes through the Administrative Procedure Act. So something that didn't even go through it, that was of highly questionable constitutionality, everybody agreed was entirely at the discretion of the executive. When the executive, in this case Trump, moved to end it, he wasn't allowed to. And the justification they didn't accept, which was that it was an unconstitutional measure. The courts have essentially said that's not a sufficient reason.
However, the Maryland District Court has ruled, and it's Judge Titus, and it was challenged on procedural due process, substantive due process, and the Equal Protection Clause, and they ruled that he is able to rescind DACA. So,
but I was going to say that a court has, but apparently, as I understand it, there's still an injunction so that he can't end it. They don't have to give out new ones, but DACA is still being renewed. So that's where we stand now on that. And there's a little bit of flurry of activity on the possibility in putting some kind of DACA thing in the budget deal that's being worked out in return for some kind of border wall funding. That looks unlikely, but that's sort of where we stand.
Oh, well, so in terms of the court proceedings, you have the Maryland court saying he can rescind it, and then you have other courts saying that he can't and he's been enjoined. So how will the legislative or the legal process go? What does it need to just work its way?
As they say, the wheels of justice turn slowly. The Supreme Court has declined as of yet to take the case, so it's going to go through the appeals process, which could take quite some time. And
so during that interim period, during that pending, DACA applications will continue to be accepted or?
Well, renewed.
Renewed. Okay. And, you've written a wonderful, I think this is your article. Yeah, I think you wrote this article, or you conducted a study on actually the makeup of DACA recipients, because the mainstream media narrative is that they're all geniuses. And I think in this article or in the study that you've done, it's like you mentioned that less than 4% have only attended college. Is that correct?
Well, here's how it works. Actually, the Congressional Budget Office has estimated the educational attainment of adult DACA recipients, particularly those who would benefit from the so-called DREAM Act. So they actually said that a little over 14%, almost 15% of adult DACA recipients. And remind your listeners, although these are individuals who came before the age of 16, they're mostly all adults now, in their 20s, some in their 30s. And these adults, when you look at the adult population, again, it's overwhelmingly adult, it's not children, that it looks like about 15% have at least a 2-year college degree. And it's probably the case that about half of that number, or 7 or 8%, have a 4-year college degree. So the overwhelming majority of DACA recipients do not have a bachelor's degree. Most have either only a high school degree or less. About a third, as I recall, have less than a high school education. It's not a particularly well-skilled population, and so to suggest that it would that this is an enormous boon to the economy. These are highly skilled people. Some may have advanced degrees, but in general, that is not correct. That is not the case.
Yeah, and yet the liberal media is sort of pushing that narrative. So
yes, I think inaccurately it would be fair to say about the education level of and the reason why, just to remind your listeners, education is very important because education is the primary factor that determines, sort of what you're likely to make in income, what you're then likely to pay in taxes, and your propensity to use public services, welfare and so forth. It doesn't always predict it, but it's a very good predictor. And so that's why the advocates have tried to highlight those cases where people are highly educated, and there are, again, a few, but that's not the typical. The fact is the DACA population is relatively unskilled, and that's the main reason that when the Congressional Budget Office first estimated their education levels, and then the fiscal impact of the DREAM Act, that is, what would be the taxes that we would collect as a result of the DREAM Act, and then what would be the services that these folks would use. In the first 10 years, it looked to be a negative $26 billion. Now, let me make that clear to your listeners. It's not because all the DACA recipients are lazy or they all came to get welfare or anything like that. It's that people with this general skill profile of the DACA recipients, mostly non-college, mostly with only a high school education or less, More than half have only a high school education or less. About, it looks like a third don't even have a high school education. People with that skill profile generally don't earn that much in America. As a result, don't pay that much in taxes and tend to use a fair amount in public services. And so when you add all that up, you get a net fiscal drain. As I've always said, there might be other arguments for DACA, but the idea that DACA is going to be a good deal for taxpayers doesn't really pass kind of even a straight face test.
Well, I mean, they came as children, and they've had the opportunity to take advantage of our public school system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the problem?
I'm not sure. Wait, what are you asking?
Why aren't they attaining, why aren't they on par with native-born citizens?
I see.
In terms of achievement level, in terms of achievement. Yeah,
complicated question.
Right.
I mean, basically, you're looking at a population that a very large fraction came in their teenage years, and a very large fraction of their parents have very little education. And so, as all prior sociological research suggests, is that if you come to America not that familiar with not that familiar with English, and your parents have modest levels of education, a very large fraction of those kids are going to struggle in the United States. They may find employment, but they're not going to be that well off, and their propensity to use public services will be high. About 80 or 90% of DACA recipients are from Latin America, and for a variety of reasons, mainly stemming from the education level of their parents, mainly stemming from the fact that a lot of them arrived in their teenage years or even maybe a little younger, but still not that familiar with English. The reason that once they get to adulthood, a very large fraction don't have, say, a bachelor's degree, and that their education levels are much less. But to compare, just in case your listeners are wondering, about 1/3 of the adult native-born population has a college degree. So about 7 or 8% of DACA recipients do. Again, that reflects certain cultural factors, education and arrival of their parents, the fact that these folks came as teenagers and things like that. So
see, we thought, we got the impression, or many Americans get the impression that they came as children, not teenagers, like 4 and 5 infants and 3 years old. This is what most of us were getting the impression from the Democrats and the media. They were 5 years old. How can you blame them? Hey, listen, if you come as a teenager, what is that, 14, 15, 16?
Yeah, so a very large fraction came in, but a lot of them came at like 10, 11, and 12. And if you come at that age, sometimes you can acculturate and do quite well in the United States, but a large fraction do struggle. Again, one of the best predictors of whether you're going to graduate high school is whether your parents graduated high school, and a majority of immigrants from Latin America have not graduated high school. At the same time, one of the best predictors of whether you will graduate college is whether your parents graduated college, and only about 7 or 8% of the parents of DACA recipients did. And so the kids follow a somewhat predictable pattern.
Mm-hmm. And I read this study where you say nearly 25% of DACA illegal aliens are functionally illiterate in English, and another 46% have an only basic English ability. So that's a total of, in other words, 70% of DACA folks don't speak English that proficiently. Is that accurate?
It does appear, based on their characteristics, that that's true. Again, although we often hear of the person who arrived very young and knows no other country, and there are certainly people like that, a very large fraction are people who struggle with English as well. So we kind of know that based on, if you look at their education levels and where they're from, and then compare it to surveys of people in a similar situation, it looks like that a very large fraction may not be that proficient, particularly when it comes to literacy. In other words, they might speak English at a reasonably good level, but when it comes to reading and writing, they struggle. And that's not that unusual generally for immigrants even people who come at 12 and 14, often, especially if they're in a household where the parents have very modest levels of education.
Well, there was an article in the Los Angeles Times that talked about why California is becoming a third world country. And I think the majority of DACA recipients are in California, correct?
I cannot recall if it's the majority, but it's at least a third, and by far larger than any other state. So Yes. Now, remember, DACA recipients there's still only about 800,000 DACA recipients. The bills that have been proposed to legalize folks is about 1.8 million, maybe 2 million, though there are proposals for significantly more people than that. So the overall in America, there are about 44 million immigrants. Of illegal immigrants, the latest government estimate is 12 million.
You think that's an accurate estimate, 12 million?
Yeah, I'm on the side of the people who think it's more like 12 million. Would you like me to explain why I think that's probably right?
Yeah.
Okay, very briefly. The way, this is not the only way, but the way you mainly estimate the number of illegal immigrants is you estimate first the number of legal immigrants in the United States based on administrative data. In other words, we have a pretty good idea of how many legal immigrants there are, and then we look at data collected by the Census Bureau. They collect a very large sample of people every year, and we can then look at the number of immigrants. So I'll run through it. If this is not exactly right, but just think of it this way. The survey shows 44 million immigrants there, and it looks like there are about 30 million or 31 million legal immigrants in the United States. So after you subtract those out, you're left with a residual of something like 11 million. And prior research suggests that the surveys, the Census Bureau surveys, miss very roughly 10% of the total illegal population, and that's how you get it up to 12 million. So it looks like there's 11 million in the census data, which they collect, and then a million more on top of that. Now, you might say, well, okay, I get this residual, this leftover number in census, but couldn't there just be a whole lot more people missed by the census data? It's possible. Let me give you two reasons why that seems unlikely, though I could give you others. One, the census data asks, did you have a child in the last year? And if there were a lot more people, legal immigrants, native-born people in America, there'd be a lot more births. Or put it this way, the hospital records show about 4 million people born in the United States, and say the American Community Survey, which is one of the ways in which we estimate illegal immigrants, shows about 4 million births. And again, you can even look at the births to the immigrants, about 800,000 births to immigrants in the survey, and about 800,000 births in hospitals, because they ask on your birth certificate, what is the birthplace of the mother? So we can have some, now it's possible that illegal immigrants are having children and not having them recorded, but illegal immigrants especially know that their children's births need to be recorded so that they can have U.S. citizenship. Another quick example is the survey asks, do you have a child? And we record the children, and then it says...
Wait, let me back up for a minute. So that's assuming that you're assuming that illegal... First of all, you have to have that because men aren't having children, right? So we're talking about the women illegal immigrants. I would think that there would be more illegal immigrant men than illegal.
There are. That's a very good point, and that might be an example. The other example we might use is that but the survey doesn't seem to be missing any people, that many people, misses some based on birth. Same with comparing school enrollment with what the survey shows. The survey asks, are you in school and are you in public school? And then we can compare that. So it's possible, but then I'll give you some other evidence if you'd like that we don't think it's wrong, is that the illegal immigrants are here, but they're not having children. And it's possible that there are illegal immigrants here, but they're not enrolling when they even have kids. They're not enrolling them in schools. Both seem unlikely. Another example is there are comparisons. The top illegal sending country, over half of all illegal immigrants in America are still thought to be from Mexico, and there are census data from Mexico, and we can even get a sense of how many people are in the United States based on the Mexican census, and that doesn't suggest an enormous number. It shows more like the 6 million that we think are here. Now, remember, there are a couple of things.
You know, they're now coming in from other countries in Latin America, like El Salvador, Guatemala, et cetera, right?
It is. So here's one way to think. Well, here's one way to think about it. If the survey implies 11 million as your base number, and then you think you missed 10%, so that means that there are 12 million. But let's say you think you missed 20%, but that would still only add another million. Even if you think we missed 30% in this survey, which really seems unlikely, but let's assume that, it only adds then another million. So maybe you can get that number up to 14 million, maybe 15 million, making what I would argue is not very likely assumptions. But when you see people say,
20 million and 30 million.
Yeah, then that would mean that we're missing 50, 60, 70%. That seems very, very unlikely.
Unlikely, yeah.
So that's why I would say It doesn't. But, you know, it isn't illegal. It's only an estimate. It could be wrong. But do I think it's that big? No. I mean, there are other things. The illegal immigrants would have to die in some number at around 7 per thousand. And we just don't have enough deaths in the United States to account for an extra 20 million people as well. So that would be, it's like births, deaths. It doesn't look out of line with the Census Bureau data. School enrollment doesn't look out of line. Mexican census data doesn't look crazy and out of line. So I'm just giving you a snapshot here, but this gives you an idea. Let me say this, and I come across this a lot. So people get confused about this. They say, well, gosh, you know, people have said it's 10 or 12 million for years now. The reason that kind of confuses people is they forget the two different numbers. The flow of new illegal immigrants into the United States versus the number of people leaving and then the overall stock. So I'll run through it really quick. In recent years, at least probably 400,000 new illegal immigrants come to America each year. They either slip across the border, they get smuggled in through a port of entry, or they overstay, and this has probably become the predominant way we think, they overstay a long-term temporary visa or even a tourist visa or something like that. They don't go home. In other words, they were supposed to go home after 3 years of work or study, or they were just supposed to go to Disneyland and then leave, and they didn't. So we have that. So that's 400,000 new illegals every year. But and maybe as low as 300,000. But the point is, then every year, however, some illegals here get deported. Some die, about 50,000 a year. It just has to be. It's a human population. We actually legalize, maybe we shouldn't, but we actually legalize some illegal immigrants. I could explain how that happens, but we do. And then finally, some illegal immigrants go home on their own. So you could have a situation where 300,000 or 400,000 new illegal immigrants come in each year, but out migration or movement out of the illegal population, either going home, getting deported, dying, or getting legalized, is such that it roughly cancels out the number of new arrivals. So that's why the number can stay relatively constant, even though enormous numbers of people still successfully cross the border. Enormous numbers of people are overstaying temporary visas.
So I saw some data that said that in 2016, I think I heard you say this, in 2016, there were 1.8 million immigrants, legal and illegal.
Right. Now, several hundred thousand of that is definitely new illegal immigrants, 300,000 to 400,000. The rest is new legal immigrants, including long-term temporary visitors who settle in the United States for extended period, like guest workers and foreign students. And then it's also new green card holders. That is, a green card, to remind your listeners, is permanent residency. You can live in the United States as long as you want and become a citizen after 5 years if you choose.
Okay, I hear my music. We're speaking with Stephen Camarota with the Center for Immigration Studies. I'm your host, Kathleen Wells. This is the Naked Truth Report. When we come back, are you open to take phone calls, Stephen?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay, we'll open up the phone lines. The number is, 866-870-5752. So we'll take phone calls. We're speaking with Stephen Camarota, the Center for Immigration Studies. I'm your host, Kathleen Wells, and this is the Naked Truth Report.
Are you a local business owner? Are you interested in increasing customer counts and store traffic or increasing traffic to your website? If you answered yes, then you need to advertise on the Naked Truth Report. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to RJ Beaton at 818-517-KRLA. That's 818-517-5752. Or email us at rj@krla870.com. That's rj@krla870.com. Kathleen Wells, the host of the Naked Truth Report, wants to hear from you. Just like our borders, the phone lines, well, they're wide open. Call in at 866-870-KRLA. That's 866-870-5752. 866-870-KRLA.
When I wake up, before I put on my makeup.
Welcome Welcome back to the Naked Truth Report. I'm your host, Kathleen Wells, and my guest is Stephen Camarota of the Center of Immigration Studies. We love Stephen because his brain is so chock full of information. I love information, don't you? I love data. You guys know I'm a data girl, right? I love data because I think data tells the real story, tells the true story more than anecdotes, right? I mean, anecdotes are good, right? They're like a story, but it's just like a story. It's like, it's not like a it's not like a broad brush understanding of what is the trend going on generally with people in America. It's just an individualized story, right? Anyway, we're going to take a call now from Mike in Sherman Oaks. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Thanks for taking my call, and I was really interested in all the statistics by the guest, and I'm definitely against sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, not complying with federal immigration enforcement agencies, so that these convicted felon, undocumented immigrants, or as Presidents Clinton and Barack Obama referred to them as they are in the Constitution, illegal aliens, do not go back on the streets and recommit like with Kate Steinle and Jamil Shah. That being my opening statement, let's talk about the official language of Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Well, we know the official language of Mexico is Spanish, and the official languages of Canada are French and English. Do we know what the official language of the United States is? There is no official language of the United States, which leads me to my first question. Do you think that ESL classes, English second languages, should be terminated for all public schools by the age of 6 years old or second grade, so there is a forced assimilation of the English language?
Yeah, that's a question for you, Stephen, because we talked about how they're not that proficient in English.
Right. So I think the question is, what is the best way for people to learn? And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that what we don't want to have public schools doing is bilingual education, right? Slowing students' acquisition of English and so forth. But ESL classes encompass a lot of different things. If the goal is to immerse children in English and make them proficient in English, then I think I think people would support that, or that makes a lot of sense. If the goal, however, is to try to teach them English but also preserve the language of their forebears or their parents, then I think that's extremely problem. That should not be the goal of public education. If you want to send your kid to school on weekends, or you want to teach them your native language, that's up to you. It's a free country. But from the point of view of the country, it's vitally important that every effort be devoted to teaching them English, because the English language is one of the most important glues that helps hold the country together.
Well, I think it's a lifetime crutch for anybody where English is not their first language. And I'll tell you this, I married someone from another country. I went through the legalization, the green card, to the most beautiful ceremony aside from the marriage ceremony and the birth of a child, the naturalization and citizenship ceremony. And I believe that every middle school student, whether they were, regardless of their status, should have the opportunity to go to the convention center and see the tears in the eyes of these people becoming American citizens from 80 countries. That's twice a month, 5,000 people, and it is the most beautiful sight you can see. It's on YouTube, and I think that there's certainly no appreciation by our own native-born citizens, but there's certainly, in my opinion, no appreciation by people that have come here other than to take and take and take.
You mean illegals? You mean illegals?
By the illegals,
yeah.
To take. And that leads me to my next question to the guest. I'm sorry, what is your first name, sir?
Stephen.
Stephen. Of all of the households of illegal immigrants, how many are fatherless households that depend on the government to be daddy? And how many children per household are there? That means that the taxpayers like Kathleen, myself, that are legal residents, citizens of this country, are paying to be daddy for these households. Do you have any statistics on that?
I can't say for sure. It is, as I recall, about 45. This is all, though, remember, of all children born to Hispanic immigrants, about 45% are born to parents who are not married. But that doesn't necessarily mean the father is not present. So, but on the birth certificate. And then for U.S.-born Hispanics, it's a majority. Though, remember, it's quite high among whites now, too. It's about 30%.
It's so even higher among blacks. I mean,
Yeah, there's
you're
72,
right.
73%. But
right.
on the question, but you had a different question, and I wanted to tell you that we do have estimates for the share of households headed by illegal immigrants using major welfare programs, and there it's like 60%. 60% of all households headed by an illegal immigrant receive one form or another of welfare, sometimes multiple programs. Some of it is the cash assistance, but mostly it's the non-cash programs, particularly programs that benefit U.S.-born children. So it would be the WIC nutrition program, free school lunch, food stamps, Medicaid, and it is also the case that illegal immigrants can live in public housing if they have a U.S.-born child. And illegal immigrants can receive cash payments like SSI and TANF, the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, the other federal cash program, if they have U.S.-born children, as well as there are local state governments that extend under certain circumstances benefits to illegal immigrants as well that then the state government pays for. But it's about 60% of illegal immigrant-headed households receive one or more welfare programs.
Well, thanks, Mike. You hear that? The Democrats always said illegal immigrants do not get benefits, welfare benefits. But if they're in a household, they have a child, they do, right? Is that how it is?
Yes. Now, an illegal immigrant would be able, under some circumstances, to directly benefit from a program, say, like Medicaid, for example, if they're pregnant. So that would be an example of an illegal immigrant getting a program. Also, if an illegal immigrant is under the age of 18, they might get the free school lunch program. They might get the WIC program. A mother might get the WIC program. So there are certain times when illegal immigrants can directly receive benefits. And there are also state governments that provide programs to illegal immigrants directly. But a large fraction of the benefits that illegal immigrants would get would be through their U.S.-born children.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take a call from Linda in Burbank. Hi, Linda. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. Line 2. Hi, Linda. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Hello.
Hi.
First, regarding the last caller, the first caller, regarding, all the other languages, I would like him to know, let alone you, everybody else know that in the California State Constitution, in Article 3, Section 6, says English is, the common language of the state of California. Shall be the language of the state of California and the United States of America. It goes into it a whole lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you all should know that,
mm-hmm.
especially your first caller. And you can all get a California State Constitution by calling your state assembly member. And when you mentioned Kevin DeLeon earlier, I don't think you've heard the good news that he's not Senator Pro Tem anymore.
Oh, what is he?
I heard that on the news.
What is he now?
He's not anything as far as I'm concerned. I think he's just plain senator.
I see.
And running, against Feinstein. That's about it.
Right. He was just on C-SPAN, Washington Journal last week. Do you have a question for Stephen, Linda?
Regarding the California sanctuary state thing, where employers will get fined if they report any illegal aliens working for them, can't we all call ICE on that Mateo illegal alien woman that got pointed at that position?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Position?
That's a good question, Stephen.
Private citizens are always encouraged to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and there's no prohibition. There can't be. I shouldn't say that. I'm shocked what California's doing so. But, in general, yes, you could always try to report to ICE, the Immigration Enforcement Agency, and they certainly can go after the person who was appointed to the state position. There's nothing to prevent them. On the question of having a official language in a state, just keep in mind, here's the thing. The courts have ruled that that's the equivalent of having basically a state bird. So it's largely meaningless. You can't have a law that says you can try to encourage people to learn English, but it doesn't mean anything when it comes to public education or conducting state business. So you can have it symbolically, but as a practical matter, the way the courts have ruled, it doesn't have any teeth.
If a bunch of people would know about that part in the California State Constitution, Article 3, Section 6, they can all use it.
But see, the thing that doesn't mean anything. That's the problem. No, but I think it's like so much in our country. You would think that having an official language would mean, for example, that state business has to be conducted in Spanish. But it turns out that the way the courts have interpreted it, and of course the way the politicians in California have run it, that's not the case. So like so many things that seem reasonable, common sense, and are right there in the law, it turns out that courts and politicians can largely ignore them with impunity.
Well, I just think it's a good thing to use against them here in California regarding language.
But how can we use it against them?
It's symbolically important.
Yeah, I don't know how we can use it against them. Now let's take a call from Marianne in Woodland Hills. Hi, Marianne. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very interested in what Stephen has to say here today, because he's given us a fact that's really horrific when you think about it. Tell me if I'm wrong by following what you're saying, but it sounds like we have 4 million illegal or illegal immigrants coming in on DACA right now in California. And we have to support these people, because what you're saying is that most of them will never get through high school. Many of them cannot speak English, and we are having some serious problems here. Now, I think everybody would understand in a more simple way that if you don't have enough money in your pocket, you don't go out and buy more stuff. And it seems to me that, well, we're continually trying to be very helpful to other people, which I think is a very kind and noble thing to do. We are stripping out and robbing our black people, our white people, and our citizens here of jobs. We're putting heavy burdens on the middle class here in California, which is about ready to crack the ship apart in trying to support these people. And it would seem to me that it would make more sense to do what the other caller just said about using common sense. If you're having a serious problem, why not just stop everything for a moment and resolve the internal problems before you bring more variables into the pot of people to make the problem more complicated, because we're now getting very dysfunctional in our solutions.
Yeah, a moratorium. Yeah.
Yeah, and so is my thinking correct here that can we all see, I mean, you don't have to be less than blind to see the tragedy. I'm shocked at seeing in our suburb here some very sad cases of people on the streets in this beautiful suburb that we're in.
Right.
and they have no place to go.
Yeah,
and many of them are Americans.
Right, homelessness.
And so my thinking is this. An election is coming up shortly. For all your listeners who are listening, they should be very careful to see who on the ballot, if anybody, is against DACA and vote for that person. Then Trump would not have to be making some consideration here and allowing more of this problem until we sort of figure out how to fix the problem that's big enough already.
Mm-hmm.
Does this make any sense?
I think it's perfectly reasonable to make the point that in California, immigration, legal but also illegal, has added enormously to the low-income population in the state. It is a serious problem. Just to give you the statistics that I think many of you know, I'll give you a couple very quickly. Take the issue of income inequality. California has become a state of haves and have-nots. Say today, this was not true historically, but today California's income distribution is more skewed in terms of haves and have-nots than was Mississippi's in 1970. The Census Bureau calculates poverty without adjusting for cost of living and then with adjusting. Because remember, $12 an hour is a lot more money in Pittsburgh than it is in Los Angeles, right? Mm-hmm. And so once you take into account cost of living, California very much by far has the highest poverty rate of any state in the country. Again, historically, that was certainly not true. Did have poverty, but it was in the middle of the country in terms of the ranking of the states. Today, it's right at the top. And again, when you take into account cost of living, or it's called the alternative poverty measure. And so that's another example of what your listeners are talking about. In terms of the fraction of the households in California that use welfare, again, in California has one of the highest fractions of any state in the country. And immigration has played an enormous role in all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now we'll take a call from Carlos and Carson. Hi, Carlos. You have a question for Stephen?
Yes, I have a question now. What percentage of your legal immigrants overstay their visas? The reason why I'm asking is because I meet quite a few people from Colombia, Argentina, Peru, El Salvador, even some Africans that have come in, even Europeans on a temporary visa, and they're here illegally. So that's also a big sector there that I don't know if you guys have analyzed what percentage has come in. And aside from that, there's also other ways in which we're being flooded with foreigners. I meet a lot of students from Japan, India, Korea, who come here on student visas, and then they're encouraged to get their degree and go to work, and then they become automatically legalized. So, I mean, our government really is opening up so many different ways of allowing and flooding our country with so many different cultures and ethnic groups, and it's really forcing, it's having a deleterious effect on our country here.
Yeah, I love hearing these calls because we're all feeling it. You know, I heard something said on, I think it was on Fox, Rachel Campbell said, we used to be, when I was growing up, we were a melting pot. Now we're a salad bowl. America has changed dramatically.
Yeah, let me run through a few things. So we don't know for sure in answer to your first question about the shares. It was traditionally thought that about 60% of illegal immigrants in the United States, if you had asked this question 10 years ago, were what are called EWIs, entrance without inspection. That's the people who slip across the border. And about 40% were people who overstayed a temporary visa. Today, we think that's flipped, of the new people anyway. In other words, each year of new people, it's probably more likely, though we can't say for certain, that about 60% are visa overstays and about 40% are the EWIs, the people slip in. So it's still a lot of people slipping in, still a lot of people overstaying, but we think that the situation is flipped, and now the majority of new additions are coming from overstays. And just to add one wrinkle or complication, What do you do with someone who enters with false documents? That happens at the border more often than you think, and then you'd have to decide how to classify that person. So there's a certain group that's somewhat ambiguous. On the larger question of people coming in, right, so your listeners understand, we give out about 1.1 million green cards a year. That's permanent residency. You can stay as long as you like and become a citizen after 5 years. The United States has the most generous permanent immigration system in the world. Half of all the immigrants in the world who have a clear path to citizenship in their new country are admitted by the United States. So, for example, when Germany admits refugees, most of those refugees some of them may become citizens, but they don't have a clear path to citizenship. In the United States, after 5 years, they can become citizens. Same with people granted asylum. So half of all the people admitted to a country in which they have a clear path to citizenship are admitted to the United States. Or put a different way, we have by far the most generous legal immigration system in the world, and then we admit hundreds of thousands of additional people on top of that for long-term, temporary, mostly cultural exchange, guest workers, or foreign students. And many of those people either overstay and join the illegal population or switch to another temporary category. So you come in as a student, then you switch after a few years after you get your degree to become a temporary worker, and then eventually you try to get a green card. Or if you can't, then you just join the illegal population. So all of that goes on. Now remember, most temporary visitors do go home. It's not that they don't, but enough overstay, several 100,000 each year, that they become a very large fraction of the total illegal population. And in terms of assimilation, I'll say this. The most important question is numbers. In 1970, I'm old enough, I was a little kid, but I remember it, there were about 10 million immigrants in the United States. There are now 40, it's probably this year will show 46 million immigrants in the United States. Immigrants were less than they're about 1 out of every 22, 1 out of every 23 residents. Now we're getting to the point where about 1 out of every 7 or 1 out of every 6 U.S. residents.
Wow. Let me try to get in one more call. Let's take Valerie online. Valerie from Long Beach. Hi, Valerie.
Hello?
Hi.
No, this is Vera I'm in Long Beach. Now, you said a salad bowl. No, this is a simmering pot. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a simmering pot. I'm listening to the feedback. I've gone into neighborhoods I'm around all the time, and neighborhoods are overwhelmingly Hispanic. Now, I don't know where they're coming from, but we're consumed, just totally consumed. There's no white, there's no black, there's nothing but Mexican. You know, a few Japanese or Korean, but mostly Mexican, and it's overwhelmed. It's a simmering pot. It's going to boil.
Well, let me answer it this way. Look, I mean, we all know immigrants. Most immigrants are decent people. The question here is, how many people can you successfully incorporate, assimilate, and integrate into your society? And one of the ways assimilation works is immigrants, in effect, are in a sea of native-born people. But the numbers coming in so great, and the numbers already here are so great, that, in effect, it greatly retards the assimilation process. Plus the fact that technology allows people to visit home and call home and listen to their hometown radio station on the internet, so the connection with the home country isn't breaking. So technology has made it harder, and finally our elites in many
Stephen,
cases
I gotta end.
hostile.
We're going off air. I'm glad. Well, thank you for joining me on the Naked Truth Report, Stephen Camarota. Check out the Center for Immigration Studies, their website. Thank you, Stephen, for being my guest, and don't forget to go and join the Naked Truth Report YouTube channel. We got to get those numbers up on my YouTube channel. Please go to the YouTube channel, the Naked Truth Report. Thank you. I'm Kathleen Wells, your host on the Naked Truth Report, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
America.